Hey, how's everybody doing there? I'm creating a couple videos just to really explain some of the more in-depth information that's needed when you're taking care of your aquarium, and to make sure to upkeep it in a proper form where you can enjoy the fish and the fish tank will be healthy and safe for them. This is my tank behind me. You'll see I got a few things in there that you're familiar with. I got a porcupine puffer in there, a dogface puffer, a couple of tangs, some clownfish, standard fish. And for my fish keeping needs, I usually keep things that I like, but also are pretty sturdy. You probably won't see me with some of those fish that you see once in a lifetime in the pet store, because there's a reason you only see them once in a lifetime, because they're usually not that strong. But I digress. We could talk about that in another episode. Today we're here to talk about the 3 most important things you can do to keep your aquarium safe and also pretty good to look at. And there's 3 very, very important things you need to do. If you do these 3 things, at the very least your tank will be pretty clean, and it won't be as toxic and polluted as it normally would be if you don't do these 3 things. So these are 3 major keys to keeping your aquarium looking good and feeling good for the fish. The first key, and most important key I would say, is your lighting. If you ever notice that some tanks you go to, they always have a misty look, or they're hazy, and you have a lot of algae on the glass or the rocks or the plants. Some people will think these are the fish that's actually causing the problems. The fish is byproduct, so nitrogen is waste. Could have a piece to do with this, because of course the more nitrogen is waste, the more fertilizer is going to go to the plants. And all this algae you see on the glass or the decorations and stuff, these are all algae, and algae is basically a plant. And these plants grow not only because they're being fertilized, but because they're receiving the light that they need to grow. So one thing that you need to do to make sure you fight this first major key is to only give as much light as you would like to give. Now, unless you're keeping corals or invertebrates, your fish don't need light. Your fish are pretty okay without light. If they get room light, or light from the window a couple hours a day when you're feeding them, that'll be fine. Most of the time, the light that you're giving the fish is for your pleasure and for the benefit of anybody that's visiting your home. So you want to make sure you stick to that first major key. Keep your light to a minimum. I'm sorry, my daughter's here trying to interrupt the video. Oh, baby, go to your sister. Go to your sister. We're going to talk after the video, okay? I promise. So, especially if you're like me and you got kids, and your children definitely want to be able to see the fish and how beautiful they look. You want to be able to leave the light on from time to time. But if you left the light on, say, when you're not at home, or if you try to schedule it for 8 to 10 hours a day, your tank is going to stay green and you're not going to be able to enjoy it. Your children aren't going to like it. Your wife's going to hate the tank. Everybody's going to say, get rid of it. Because the most common thing for people to do when the aquarium looks good is they leave the light on. And when you leave the light on, you'll accumulate a ton of algae. The algae won't look good. Even though it looks bad, it's not really toxic for the fish. So it will look bad. Your water can actually become green, or a hazy yellowish green. Your water will be all green. Your plants could be all green. Your gravel could turn green. There are times that instead of green it could be brown. There are times it could be red, depending on which kind of algae you're developing. In saltwater tanks you can actually develop a lot of yellow and purples. But mostly in freshwater you're going to develop green and brown. Saltwater you'll develop green, brown, red, yellow, and purple. But this all comes from the amount of light that you give in the aquarium. So you ask, how much light do you give? You should give approximately, say, I would suggest 4 to 6 hours of light a day. You can cut it down. You can probably give it 2 to 4 hours. But I say 4 to 6. It creates a healthy cycle for the fish and a healthy cycle for yourself. Because looking at wildlife, I think, actually helps stabilizes your day, and it's good for you. It's good for the household. And within this 4 to 6 hours a day, this is when you want to feed them, because now the fish become accustomed to eating when the light is on, and they're much more responsive. So you'd want to use this 4 to 6 hour block. It could be 2 to 4 hours, but I suggest 4 to 6 hours. Use this same 4 to 6 hour block to feed your fish. Take notice from things in your aquarium. See if the fish look healthy. Look at their eyes. Look at their fins. Make sure your filters are functioning properly. And this is what you would do in this 4 to 6 hour block. Any time of day that you like, just 4 to 6 hours. And what I would suggest, don't do it at a time when you're not home, because it just doesn't make any sense. Do it when you are home, when everybody is that would experience it. The aquarium is home. You know, whether it's like 4 or 5 o'clock when you get home from work and school to maybe 8, 9 o'clock when you start winding down. And that's the first major key, controlling the algae by controlling your light. The second major key out of the 3 keys to keep your aquarium great to look at and non-toxic is to not overfeed the fish. Fish are like kids. Kids always want to eat, and a lot of times they want to eat the bad stuff. So if your fish want to always eat, and they always look like they want to eat, especially goldfish. Goldfish are always hungry. Oscars are always hungry. Certain saltwater fish are always hungry, or so you think. They're like children. If you keep giving them candy, they're going to keep taking it until they're sick. It's the same thing with fish. Fish will keep eating food until they're sick. The proper thing to do is to feed your fish within a 2-minute time frame. So you're going to give them as much food as they will eat in about 2 minutes. And I don't mean dump a bunch of food in there and see if they finish it in 2 minutes. I mean put very little, make sure they eat that. Put a little bit more, make sure they eat that. And you can do this for a time frame of up to 2 minutes, I feel. And just make sure they eat all of it. You never want to just put food in there and let it settle to the bottom. And you're polluting the tank yourself. You're creating a bunch of pollution. That's like somebody came into your house and poured a bunch of cheeseburgers and fries and steaks on your floor. Or for the vegans in us, you know, some lettuce, you know, celery, tomatoes, whenever you leave it on the floor, it's going to be polluted, no matter how healthy the food is. So with that being said, do not overfeed your fish. Don't just put excessive food in there. Don't figure, hey, they're going to eat it sooner or later. No. Only put in there what they're going to eat within this 2-minute time span. And also, certain foods cause more waste. So if you're putting floating food that always floats to the back of your filter and it stays there, that's going to pollute your tank with you, because it's going to stick in your filter pads and your fish aren't getting to eat it. If you're putting sinking food and it goes to high places that you can't get to, that's going to pollute your tank a little bit quicker as well. Certain high protein, dense foods, such as bloodworms and things of that nature, and beef heart. Listen to the words bloodworms and beef heart. You're going to have a lot more parasites attracted to these kind of things. So be very, very careful when you're feeding it that it gets eaten completely and you're not overfeeding your fish with this kind of stuff. Beef heart and bloodworms are very good for discus and angelfish. I'm actually not really for that kind of stuff because it would really, really pollute your tank. It's my opinion. This is me from Learning Through Nature and Father Nature's with 20 years experience in the business. My opinion. You're able to have opinions after 20 years. Now that's the second key. Overfeeding your fish. Do not overfeed your fish. Number 3, very, very crucial, very, very important. Number 3 is when your water evaporates, no matter what kind of filter you have. You could have a wet dry filter, you could have a hang on the back filter, you can have a canister filter. Those would be the 3 major forms of filtration. The hang on the back is the one that hangs on the back of your tank and it has a tube that comes in to intake your water and falls down like a waterfall. The canister filter is the one that sits on the side or the back or underneath your tank and it has an intake and the exhaust tubes going to your tank, or a wet dry that has the water falling down into a filter down below and gets sent back into your tank. With any one of these forms of filtration, you need to make sure that as your water evaporates, you fill it back up. What happens is if you do not fill your tank back up or replenish the water that evaporates, you're putting more stress and pressure on your filter. So you figure your filters, if your tank's all the way filled like this, right, and it just has a hang on the back filter or a canister filter, the lower your water gets, the more pressure it takes for this filter to pull the water and push it back up to your tank. When the tank is full, it's almost working off a theory of inertia. It's just constantly, the system is constantly full, and you have more pressure around the tube, so the water falls easier, and it's easier for it to push back up. The less water you have, the more pulling it takes, the more tugging it's going to take for the filter to work. And the more the filter has to work to generally just get its job done, it's not going to turn over as much gallons of water per hour as it needs to. So if you have a filter that usually does 400 gallons per hour, it's supposed to filter a 70-gallon tank. If your water evaporated and you're a couple of inches down from the top, you might filter maybe a 30-gallon tank. So your tank just is not going to remain that clear. It's not going to be that clean of pollutants. So as your water evaporates, make sure to fill your tank back up. And you're filling back up with room temperature tap water. You can have a saltwater tank. You're still topping it off, and that's the correct term, topping it off with room temperature tap water. If you put stress coat in it, or any kind of and no commercial stress coat, any other kind of water conditioner to take the chlorine out the tap water, you can do that. That's fine. But the most important thing before you start worrying about what kind of water you're putting back in is to put water back into your tank to take the stress off of the filter so it could work at its optimum level. I can't stress how important it is. There's times where people come and they see their tank and they don't understand why it's not as clean as it should be, and their water's halfway down because your tank is not filtering as it should. It doesn't have the proper pressure needed for the filter to work properly, and the filter's overusing itself, and after a while it'll burn out. When it burns out, you got to buy a whole new filter or maybe possibly an impeller. So that's what tanks that have a hang on the back filter or a canister. Now, if you have a wet dry like I do, it's more important for you to look at the bottom, because now if you're wet dry, if your tank is down here and you have a wet dry, you're in very big trouble. That means not only have you burnt out your filter on the bottom, you probably made your heater crack because your heater is probably down in your wet dry, and if your run is dry, it's going to crack and overheat. Like I said, your pump's going to burn out. Your impeller on your pump's going to burn out. It's going to probably freeze up, and you're going to need a new pump. And your fish aren't going to get the filtration you need, and the water's going to be polluted. If your water's down here in a tank with a wet dry, you're in very big trouble. So usually, even with a tank with a wet dry, your water can be up here, and you still need water in your tank because the water's going to evaporate somewhere first. And where's it going to evaporate first? It's going to evaporate in the filter first. So what you need to do is look down your filter down here. Next time I'll be opening this up, I got to move a couple of things to get down here this time. You have to look down there and make sure that your water is at least 2 inches above the pump. And the utility pump is what circulates the water back up to the tank. So if your water isn't consistently 2 inches above your pump, you're gonna really shoot yourself in the foot. You're gonna make sure that your water's gonna be polluted. Your water's not gonna be clean. It's not gonna be getting filtered, and that's just the wrong thing to do. You're doing wrong by your fish. PETA will come for you. So what we want to do is make sure we stick to that third rule, which is make sure your tank has enough water for it to function properly. And also, as water evaporates, all the different minerals, nitrogenous waste, and all that kind of stuff stays in there. So it's almost like you're diluting it every time you add water as well. You know, with the ocean and other bodies of water in our biome, in our habitats, as the water evaporates, it kind of converges in these clouds, and then you're going to get precipitation, you're going to get rain, and this rain is going to bring the same water back down. For aquariums, it doesn't have that benefit. It's going to evaporate into the environment, and it's not coming back down as rain. So what you're doing is, as it evaporates, you're playing Father Nature. That's us. You're playing Father Nature, and you're putting the water back into the environment that was lost during evaporation. So make sure as the water evaporates, you put it back in your tank to simulate what happens with rainfall, to make sure your filters function at the proper level, and to make sure that you're keeping your water as free from pollution as possible. So those are the 3 major keys to keeping your aquarium safe, and pleasurable to look at, and good for the fish. That's 1, keep your algae down by limiting the amount of light. 2, do not overfeed your fish. And 3, when your water evaporates, make sure to replenish it with room temperature tap water. I'll see you next time. Thanks again.